This is my Formative Assessment Action Research Project. My name is Brandon Bishop. I chose to look at formative assessment and its effect on student retention of content and motivation in the classroom. The problem that I noticed, and the reason why I chose this topic for my project, was that recently I've noticed many of my on-level U.S. history students have not been engaged or motivated to learn social studies content. I frequently noted students using cell phones, talking to other students, and generally not being very focused during direct instruction when appropriate. And as a social studies teacher who uses direct instruction often, this is a serious problem. So the questions that I had to ask and try to answer with this project were, how do I engage students in content that they may not want to learn? A lot of students just don't like history for whatever reason. And how can I measure what students remember from lectures using formative assessment? Formative assessment in this case being defined as any assessment that is used as part of the learning process to inform instruction and not as a summative final test or quiz. So my solution for trying to engage students and help them to remember specific content from social studies was I determined to try frequent non-graded quizzes given at the start of each class, otherwise known as an entry slip, a type of formative assessment, that would measure content that was taught the previous day. I hoped that by holding students accountable for what was taught, they might feel more engaged and motivated to actually learn the content and pay attention better and stay more focused during direct instruction. By making these frequent quizzes non-graded, I was attempting to take pressure off of students while focusing them on learning content rather than worrying about their grade, which is a frequent problem in most high schools, but particularly mine, Blue Valley Southwest. I hoped to see an increase in student motivation and retention over time as they would know and understand and expect these quizzes to continue. So in order to begin the project, I first conducted a literature review of several references about formative assessment and their effectiveness in the classroom. The biggest study that I came across was a study conducted by Black and William in 1998 out of King's College in London that reviewed 250 previous studies about formative assessment. They found generally that formative assessments can boost summative assessment final scores from an effect range of 0.4 to 0.7, showing a positive correlation between formative assessment and student engagement and retention, which is what I was interested in. So I was hoping to achieve similar positive correlation between assessment and outcomes as a part of my study. Carol Boston in 2002, reviewing Black and William, found that formative assessment can help support the expectation that all children can learn to high levels and counteracts the cycle in which students attribute poor performance to lack of ability and therefore become discouraged and unwilling to invest in further learning, therefore increasing engagement and motivation to actually learn. Finally, a study conducted by Maya Khanna in 2015 found that students taking ungraded pop quizzes felt positive about having quizzes in their classes. Furthermore, the reduction of test anxiety was a key factor in improving students' attitudes regarding class content, which is exactly the outcome that I was hoping for by conducting my formative assessment non-graded research questions. So, in order to collect data for my formative assessment project, I had to determine which was going to be my quantitative and what would be my qualitative. My quantitative data would be simple. 8 non-graded multiple choice quizzes of 5 questions each, with the highest possible score of 5 out of 5, a lowest score of 0 out of 0. Thankfully, none of my students scored a 0. The qualitative data was a Google form of 9 survey statements rated on a scale from 1, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree. This was given both before and after the 2-week trial period in order to measure any changes in engagement and attitude. And the group that I decided to try this study on is my 6-period United States history class of 26 students. This is my least motivated class this semester. They're frequently distracted on their phones or talking out of turn while I'm trying to teach, and I wanted to try and find a way to engage them, their natural active curiosity, and make them more involved in the learning process. So here are some examples of multiple choice questions that I would give to the students on each day. This period of 2-week study incorporated 3 different social studies units. The tail end of my unit on American imperialism, where we were discussing things like the Spanish-American War, why the United States started to become an empire in the 1890s. The World War I unit, and why the United States saw itself as necessary to get involved in World War I, and the World War II unit. And these are some examples of multiple choice questions that students saw. There were about 40 questions, 5 questions each on the 8 8 different formative assessment non-graded quizzes that were given over a 2-week period. Here are the Google Forms survey questions, both positive and negative survey statements. So the positive statements are things like, I can recall what the teacher says easily, I pay close attention to teacher lectures, I am curious about American history, I remember historical facts with ease, and daily non-graded quizzes help me learn. Remember, this is based on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree. So with the positive survey statements, I'm looking for higher numbers, right? So an average of 4.1 would be pretty good because that would show that most of my students are curious, they pay attention, they recall well, they remember facts. The negative survey statements, on the other hand, I'm looking for lower scores over time, as they are statements such as, I often get distracted during teacher lectures, I use my cell phone frequently during class, I often miss instructions from the teacher, and I frequently talk over the teacher. I would hope that students would rate these lower as the more on the disagree end of the scale, the 5-point scale. Okay, so my analysis of the data. After 2 weeks, this is the quantitative formative multiple non-graded multiple choice quizzes. The data shows it's kind of sporadic. So the students, and notice at quiz 1, had an average score of about 4.1 out of 5, which is pretty good. But then the next 2 quizzes, the average dropped significantly to 2.95 and 3.05, which is kind of all over the place. You notice between quizzes 4 and 7, there's a little bit of upward growth, with quiz 5 being a little bit out of place there, and the final quiz still coming in between the average of 3 and 4 out of 5 questions correct. So not exactly the high results that I was expecting of retention to increase over time. I think part of this can be due to the fact that 2 weeks is not really enough time to conduct a study like this. I would imagine that if this non-graded multiple choice quizzes became part of my classroom culture and students were to expect it, that they would do better over time and we'd see scores increasing on an exponential scale. Where we saw a little bit more positive results was in terms of the Google Forms survey qualitative responses. So here is a chart showing the positive survey statements, average response pre-study and post-study with the average change at the end. It all boils down to that number in the bottom right corner of 0.32. So what that shows is a positive correlation between the daily non-graded quizzes, the formative assessment, and student engagement in class, being able to recall and pay attention and be more curious about American history. A 0.32 shows, remember the final number, a positive 1 would be complete total positive correlation. So 0.32 is not bad, but I would still classify it as moderate in terms of the strength of the correlation. Where we see a little bit weaker correlation is a decrease in negative behaviors related to student engagement and motivation. Remember those negative statements being things like getting distracted during teacher lectures, using cell phone frequently, missing instructions from the teacher. We see a negative correlation here of 0.075. So as the formative assessments increased, I would hope that these behaviors would decrease by a factor in -1, meaning total negative correlation. This is a -0.75. So not a very strong correlation in decreasing these negative behaviors that I was hoping to get rid of. So project outcomes and results. Black and William had found, remember, a 0.4 to 0.7 positive correlation between formative assessment and retention. My own study found only 0.32, so a slightly weaker correlation, strength of correlation between the two. Perhaps that number would fall within the 0.4 to 0.7 range if this study were to be conducted over a longer period of time with a bigger sample size. It means that formative assessment has helped to improve student motivation and engagement in class, but only marginally. As for student retention of content based on the small sample size, I cannot say with certainty that non-graded quizzes have boosted scores. In future studies, I hope to end the project with a summative assessment in order to determine whether or not non-graded quizzes can help boost test scores relative to other students. So in the future, as I disseminate the results and look for ways to improve my classroom with formative assessment, I plan to present this research to my department PLC first, with a focus on how we as social studies teachers can better incorporate formative assessment in order to increase student engagement. Non-graded quizzes is the route that I took, but I hope to brainstorm other effective formative assessments with my department because they tend to work very well with the social studies. I then hope to present my findings to administration and possibly the entire school in order to find more ways to incorporate formative assessment into each classroom within our building. Future directions, I hope to continue these non-graded quizzes. I think they were effective and the students seemed to enjoy them. They did seem to boost motivation and engagement. And if it becomes part of my culture, I expect to see that continue. Here are my references, and thank you for watching my presentation.